Hello YouTube, and welcome back to a Gentoo in review. This is the second for the year, and I thought I'd give you an update on building Gentoo on a new system that uses the EFI BIOS hindrance. Anyway, thank you all very much for a lot of suggestions and things that you talked about. I, of course, just to even get my USB stick to boot into Gentoo, I had to, of course, disable the EFI, or I should say, I had to enable legacy BIOS boot options. Playing with some things, I ended up going ahead and erasing the security keys, blowing away secure boot in there, and as I did this, I also constantly rebooted to check to make sure I did not hose the Windows 8 partition or hard drive, because while I don't plan on using the Windows 8 partition or hard drive too often, I did want to try to keep it intact for now, just in case something went wrong on the Linux side. I could still boot back into and do research as needed on the Windows side. Throughout all that, I was successful in pretty much getting rid of all of that and being able then to boot into the Gentoo USB stick using the legacy boot option available. Now, tried what I could. I still had and still have a problem with the Gentoo sources in regards to making it so that EFI frame buffer and the Intel driver that this system requires works nicely or cooperatively together. As I stated in my last video, for instance, I can boot so that Intel is the main driver, in which case I get no display when it boots up. It's blank. I know I can wait for about 12 seconds or so. With a blank screen, I can log in with my credentials, I can type in *X, and I can then pull in the Intel drivers that then take over, and I have a GUI like you see here. Or, using the Gentoo sources, I can build the EFI frame buffer, and I can use Xorg's either Visa or frame buffer device driver for video, and I can still get everything to work. But at that point, I've lost all video acceleration. I'm getting about 5 to 6 frames per second, and nothing works proper that requires any type of video acceleration. I did, however, for grins, and because I was thinking about doing a video in the near future about installing a vanilla kernel in Linux, I went ahead and emerged the vanilla kernel. And let's see here, if I get into here, eSelect kernel list, you will see that I have the Linux 3.12.6 kernel. 3.10.17 is what was available at the time, and it just recently, within the last couple days, when I did an update to the world, downloaded and installed Linux 3.10.25, which I have not built a kernel based on that version just yet. Everything I've done for the open source, or I should say the Gentoo sources, has been based off of 3.10.17. I did, however, take 3.12.6 vanilla and went in there, make menu config, and just stepped through each of the menus and installed what I knew I needed to install. And when I was done, I can now boot into EFI frame buffer, and it works. I see a screen. I can then log in with my credentials and *X, and it uses the Intel drivers correctly. If we do a GLX gears, for instance, here, we now should see that I'm getting about 60 frames per second, which is perfect. Everything with the 3.12.6 vanilla kernel is working wonderfully. I have only one or two small things that still do not work within Gentoo, and I'm really quite surprised because I didn't expect that the vanilla kernel would be that easy to configure. I've never really used anything other than the Gentoo sources, and in most cases the Gentoo sources have always done a great job for me. Now, I have been testing when I've had free time, rebuilding the Gentoo sources over and over and over again, attempting to match what the vanilla sources look like. And I, of course, changed all the graphics sessions and all that information to be almost identical. There has to be something else within the Gentoo sources, that the way they've configured them, that's interfering with the way that this plays together, or it just has to be something to do with the way the new... I noticed that there's some new options in the 3.12.6 kernel for the Intel drivers that get compiled automatically. I'm still working on that, but it is really good to know that in 3.12.6 vanilla I've got 99.9% of everything working, including, if you watch my screen here, I even have the touchscreen working with this driver, and it is very responsive. I didn't have to do anything to, I'm just touching the screen right now to bring up menus and pop over here. It's working great, including that touch screen. So very happy with that, because it is a little weird getting used to this new type of mouse that doesn't have a left click and a right click, and you can tap on it in different spots. But it's kind of nice to be able to just use the screen sometimes to get things to work. Any which way, that solved most of my issues by using the vanilla kernel source. One other thing that I've run into that is a problem, and I'm going to do a separate video to show how to fix it, is I had to go against my whole philosophy of building what I've always said is, if it's inside the computer, you ought to build it into the kernel. Therefore, I build my sound drivers, my video drivers, anything inside into the kernel. If it's a module that I'm going to build, it's because it's going to plug in from the external, and because it's not always there or present. But until I can figure a more permanent solution for the HD sound to work correctly, I have to use a program called hda-jack-retask. Now, right now I've got the sound loaded, and if we do an ls mod, you'll see that I've got sound HDL codec right down here with everything set up as modules. Now, for some reason, I can't do the same thing too with the way the Gentoo sources are, but it works perfect within the vanilla kernel. Now, to make this work, I actually have to go out of Xorg, disconnect all the sound, log back into KDE, then run hda-jack-retask, and it brings me this menu system here. Oh, and the other thing is that I just forgot to say, once you unload it and restart KDE, you then have to load the drivers again inside of KDE, then open up this. And like I said, I'll do another video that talks about this. The reason why I'm not doing it right now is because it's going to screw up all my sound when I go to do this, and I'm probably going to have to do it all silent and then just do some sort of talk over the video and redo it that way. But when you do this, you then choose the IDT 92HD91B-BXX, show unconnected pins, and if you do an override on pin 0x10 and you tell it that that's your internal speaker LFE, that's actually your bass boost that's there. You then take 0x0F change that to internal speaker, and then jump up to the 0x0D, which is your internal speaker. Now the problem is, if you try to do this, and this works perfectly in the Linux Mint Debian edition, and I don't have to go through all this headache of doing this. In there, I can just hit apply now and it'll work. If I do it with right now, and I do apply now, I put in my credentials because I'm logged in as my user, and then it gives me this error. Oh. It usually gives me an error. Hope I didn't just mess up all my sound. We'll find out here in just a second. Normally what I do is I get an error that says that the devices are in use and you can't do it, therefore that's why I have to get out of it and redo it. But that's quite interesting that it does that. So let's see if that works. 'Cause right now though, you can install the boot override and it doesn't work. But now I'm kind of curious. Let's do a speaker test. Let's see here, -T wave -C. Nah, my speakers are still really low. Well, so it still didn't work. Unless I need to restart my Xorg. But I don't think I had to do that with Debian Edition. Either way though, when you do that and then restart Xorg, all of a sudden the sound is robust, it's really loud, it's way it should and ought to work. So it's much better. When it's like this though, it's just still using the old stuff that's just using two speakers internally, and you can barely hear the sound. When you do those little repins there and save it and restart your server or your Xorg, then like I said, all your sound is working proper. Now because of that, I have some applications that sort of work with sound. Like I've been having a lot of issues with Clementine and especially VLC, that sometimes it'll come back and it'll say, oh, can't play the video sound, it's not present, and I do this and all of a sudden sound's working proper and it sees it correctly. But I can't make it permanent. You know, it's one thing I still haven't been able to do is make it so I don't have to do something at boot up, and I'm still trying to figure out. Now I've looked all over online and I've found that this is a known issue, and actually it's been a known issue for a few years that people have been working with this, and the ALSA drivers for the Sound HDA Intel need to be rewritten properly, because there are some patches for it out there, but this is the quickest fix to make it work. And since I don't, a lot of times if I'm using Gentoo, I don't reboot that often, but it's the best way to fix it. Another weird thing that I've run into, and maybe you guys maybe you guys know about this, I'm not sure. I use Docky, and you'll notice it's not there because I wanted to show you this. If I start Docky and I click on this icon for Docky and pop it up, I'm going to move my little window over a little bit while it loads, you'll notice that there are some missing icons here. Those icons are system icons that aren't being displayed. Like there's the system settings icon, there's the console icon. Anything that I've built that's an external application that I've installed on here and put on here, it's all there, it all looks good. But anything that's system based, and I'm just using the standard KDE type themes, nothing strange and unusual. But if we were to quit Docky here, and if I was to open up Docky again and run it with the little gearbox instead of the icon, this is what's so strange. Then I see my system icons for those two items that I have listed, and that's really strange for me. So I don't know why that is. If I run it one way, it shows them. If I run it another way, it doesn't. So as you can see, there's still a few weird quirks, but otherwise things are working really well in Gentoo, and I'm very happy. Now some of you might look at it and say, hey, why does he have this icon over here? That's Lancelot that I'm using down there. But I also have this KDE, which is the normal start menu. Now the reason for that is Sometimes when I want to save my session, you have to go in here to leave. You can save session, and you can save your desktop the way you want it. But unfortunately, in Lancelot, you cannot do that. When you click on the leave option down here, you just have these five options here. And I've read about this and found that the person who manages the software or the development of Lancelot has said, yeah, it's not programmed in there, and no, he has no plan in the future to place it into it that I know of. So for that reason, until I get my desktop exactly the way I want it with the session, I leave both those application starters open at the same time, so when I'm done with one, I can go ahead and go in there and save session. I know someone asked me that once before, and that's why I have 2 session starters on my taskbar. So that's pretty much it. EFI is working really well. A big plus to a program called Refined. That's lowercase r, capital EFI-ND. Refined is what has allowed me to not have to even worry about grub, but to be able to install Linux, and as long as the kernel is set up so that it uses the EFI stub and a few other modifications so that it kind of shows an EFI presence, I can then, it'll see it and let me boot into it using just the REFI-ND boot manager or refined boot manager. It works great. It sees my Windows partition. It sees all the Linux different kernel partitions. If we look, for instance, if we go over here and look at boot, you will see that I've got as long as it's labeled VM Linux in the beginning, it's going to see this, especially as long as you have those items built into the kernel. It actually will detect them. But for instance, you'll see that I've got a Gentoo EFI, a Gentoo test, and a Gentoo touch. Now the Gentoo touch, of course, I was testing out, trying to get the touch screen to work proper. In Gentoo test, that's where I kind of throw different items into the kernel and just see if I can get stuff to work proper. And then Gentoo EFI, I know that the EFI frame buffer is going to work without an issue. And then of course I've got 3.12.6 vanilla. That's just there. And so those are my different kernels, those 4 or 5 kernels that it shows and sees. And it shows them up automatically. I don't have to do anything with grub, like I said, or Lilo, Linux Loader, all that. The refined application works beautiful. So if you're looking at something that you want to do to dual boot, you still have to hit escape, of course, and hit the boot menu and choose refined as an option, but it works well. And eventually, once I get things worked out, I'll look at making it automated so it'll work out too. But I just want to give you guys a quick update for now. And I've been getting a lot of talk about the Gentoo installation, so once I get my virtual disks moved over from my old machine, or I may just have to do it on the old machine because those are getting pretty large, I will try to do the next step, which a lot of people want to know: how do you install KDE in Gentoo? So we'll be looking at that pretty soon here. I will get to it, I promise, and then we'll make it so you can just keep on going with those tutorials and get KDE installed and then see how it's supposed to boot up. And hopefully that will help a lot more of you guys out. So thank you for watching. Thank you for all your comments and those that were concerned in trying to figure out how to help me out. And it's not so bad, once you figure things out. I am just really surprised that I cannot still get the Gentoo sources kernel to work proper for this. I've followed all the Gentoo wikis that there are. The only thing that I am not doing is I'm not setting up grub like I said. I'm just using refined to boot, but that shouldn't be the problem. I just got to figure out what's the difference between the two kernels and see what we can do. Because I know, for instance, I've got Linux Mint Devi Edition running side by side with this, and it works, and it's got an older kernel. It's definitely not 3.12. I think it might be running, in fact, 3.52 on there, if I remember right. So it's even older than some of this that I'm working with. and yet it's working. It's using the Visa drivers, so it's not using the Intel drivers, but it gets a lot further and it's a little bit faster. But that's all I'll say. I've probably been rambling a little too long. It is now, wow, 20 minutes. I'm going to shut up. Thank you all for watching. It is morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having. Have a good one. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you all later. Bye.